Okay, dudes. So here we go. As you are viewing this, I am on my way to Dalton, Georgia, where the GMC Prep School boys soccer team will be competing against Dalton Academy in the Final Four of the GHSA Public State Soccer Championships for the Class A, and hopefully we will come home with a victory, and we'll play in the state championship game next Tuesday over in Macon. So y'all be thinking about us, and hopefully the boys will play well, and we'll come home with a victory and move on to the state championship. We were talking yesterday about how World War II was the seminal event in the 20th century, how it changed everything that came after it. It had an impact on everything that came after it. And we had talked about several different things. The baby boom, where the population rate kind of amps up a little bit because all of these millions of men that come home from the war are wanting to get married, have a house or build a house, and have babies. And so the population goes up simply because of all these people that are put back into society. We talked about how industry and business changed, how Georgia's industry really increases from being strictly or primarily agricultural to, by the time 1960 rolls around, 1960, about a third of the workforce is employed in some sort of white collar job rather than blue collar, working in a factory or working on the farm. It's 2:35 now. So, and then we began yesterday talking about the Cold War. There's a sweet little video that I want to show you if you haven't seen it already. It's hiding behind Nikita Khrushchev and John F. Kennedy there. And if you haven't seen it, remind me on Monday, and I'll make sure that you get to watch it. It's about 7 or 8 minutes long, but it's a really good explanation of what the Cold War was all about. But we did at least talk about how the Cold War was not a shooting war between the Soviet Union and the United States, but both sides supported countries that were at war with each other, or perhaps at war within their boundaries, a civil war. And again, we'll come back to that. Let's talk about one of those wars just a little bit. And it's called America's Forgotten War because nobody ever talks about it. A couple of years ago, I was in Washington, D.C. one summer at a teacher institute, the Friends of the World War II Memorial Teacher Institute. And we got to go to a grand tattoo, not like what we had here last Friday. But it's a celebration. It's a musical. It really tells the story of the U.S. Army. And while we were there, I got to meet some Korean veterans, a couple of them from Georgia, and just the most interesting guys that I've talked to in a long time. And it kind of struck me that nobody knows who these guys are because Korea is a forgotten war. Nobody really has paid much attention to it over the years. But the Korean War happens because Korea is divided into North and South Korea. Both sides think they rule the country. And really what we have are two different countries, North Korea and South Korea. The 38th parallel, if you look at a world map, I don't know that you can see this on the camera, but you know where I'm walking right now. And you find Korea. Korea's right here. It's between China and Japan. And today you have North Korea and South Korea. And this right here is the 38th parallel. It runs through the middle of Korea. And that was the dividing line. The 38th parallel became no man's land. Nobody was there. You had armed forces on both sides. And it divided communism in the north from democracy in the south. On June 25th, 1950, North Korea invaded South Korea. and nearly took over what was South Korea. The United Nations, they don't declare war, they declare a police action. And because of that, that's one of the reasons this is a forgotten war, is nobody ever really calls it a war. It was a police action. But as part of this police action, they send UN troops to assist South Korea. They go back and forth. During the 2 years of the Korean conflict or the Korean War, there are about 25,000 Americans killed, and there are roughly 500 Georgians. I think, and I'll try to check, if you'll remind me, I'll check on it. I think there was one person from Milledgeville killed during the Korean War, and there might have been a couple of GMC alumni who were killed during the Korean War, but there weren't many, and there weren't a lot of Georgians killed in action or who died during the war. But about 25,000 Americans did, and that's, one is a significant number, but 25,000, that's quite a bit. Peace is declared in July of 1953. So the war actually lasts a little more than 3 years, and there's no winter. Notice what I said. Peace is declared. There's no armistice. There's no treaty. They just decide, they agree to stop fighting. And so today, technically, that Korean War is still there. That state of war still exists between North Korea and South Korea. And of course, you hear a lot in the news about North Korea and how unstable the country is. The people, if you look at a North Korean and a South Korean today, a South Korean is going to be taller, he's going to be fuller, and a North Korean is going to be smaller, just a smaller person. That's because of diet. It's because of nutrition. Most people in North Korea are severely malnourished. So July 1953, there's no winter. And again, just like World War I, just like World War II, Georgia benefits because of the military bases, and those businesses that serve those military bases also benefit from the war. Couple of things, and I'm sure there's a video up here, but again, it's kind of hard for you to hear. You can see it, but it's hard for you to hear. I may leave the link so whoever's showing you this can show you those if you have time. But you can see North Korea Reds declare war. They invade. You can see the line that shows the 38th parallel or the sign, and then the armistice that was signed. What's interesting is to look at the map. June 25th, 1950, here you have North Korea to the north of the 38th parallel, South Korea to the south. September 14th, 1950, North Korea is controlling almost all of South Korea. They've taken the capital of Seoul, and they've almost taken South Korea except for Busan. In November, just a couple of months later, roles have been reversed, and South Korea has taken back not only its country, but much of North Korea. And then by the time peace is declared, by the time peace breaks out, things are back basically to where they were when we started. And so it's one of the reasons it's a forgotten war is because there's no clear winner. Things are pretty much the same as they were when it started. And then you can see an armistice is signed, hostilities cease, but really it's not a treaty. There's still a lot of hostility between those two countries. And of course, South Korea, a friend, an ally of the United States. North Korea has long been an ally of China, more a puppet of China, which is a communist nation as well. One of the cool things in Washington, D.C., and one of the things I wish I had had the opportunity to share with you is the Korean War Memorial. It's a really neat monument. There's not a monument in Washington, D.C. that is not meaningful, that's not cool, that's not worth looking at. And this one is kind of interesting. You can see you've got you've got soldiers in the Army, you've got a couple of Air Force airmen, You've got some Marines and you've got some Navy corpsmen who are out on patrol. They're coming in from patrol. They're headed toward the flagpole. They're in the distance. And you see, they're walking through what looks to be very rough terrain. That's because Korea was very difficult. They all have on a parka. That's because it rained a lot in Korea. It snowed a lot in Korea. It was cold and it was hot in Korea. The original design called for 38 soldiers. Why 38? Because of the 38th parallel. The actual design ended up with 19. But if you'll notice, along the right side, there's that black granite wall, and it's very reflective. And in fact, if you look right here, you can see this soldier's reflection in the wall. And they were placed so that every one of them, you would be able to see their reflection in the wall. So in reality, there are 38 soldiers there to represent the 38th parallel. At the far end, there's a fountain, and it's got the names of all the countries that participated in that particular conflict. You'll see what looked to be like etchings in the black wall. Those were made from actual photographs that people gave to the organization that created this memorial so that they could etch those. So they're actual men and women who were in Korea during the Korean War. It's really overuse it, I know, but it's really a neat monument. Hopefully I'm going to get to go visit that this summer in July. So what happens in Georgia? That's kind of what happens in the world, and of course it has an impact on Georgia. But we're going to look at three things, and we may just look at that first one today, the changes in agriculture. But we're going to look at that. We're going to look at the growth of Atlanta, and we're going to look at Governor Ellis Arnold. He is probably the most progressive of our mid-20th century governors, and he does an awful lot. I think you're going to be surprised by what Governor Arnold accomplished during his time in office. So what happens to agriculture in Georgia? First of all, it becomes mechanized. And because it becomes mechanized, there's less demand for the sharecropper. And so we see the sharecropper begin to disappear, not only in Georgia, but really across the United States, but specifically in Georgia. We see a change from growing things in the field to milk, becoming dairy farmers, livestock. So we have this increase in meat and dairy products during World War II. Y'all are not old enough to remember, but back in its heyday, Putnam County, Eatonton was the dairy capital of Georgia, produced more milk than the rest of the state combined. Today, Georgia grows more chicken than anything. The largest industry in Georgia. If you put everything that Georgia grows and sells together, it's worth about $4 billion just in income. But when you start looking at the impact that chicken farming in particular has on Georgia, it's about $13.5 billion. Now, farm income would be sales, but the rest of that $9.5 billion would be from jobs. It would be from products that people need, services that people who are in the chicken business need. On an average day, so today's Thursday, well, today for me is Thursday. It'll be Friday for you. Tomorrow on Friday, the state will produce about 24.7 million pounds of chicken meat and about 8.5 million eggs. So that's a lot of chicken, and that's a lot of future chickens that never get to become chickens because they're eggs. And so dairy and livestock become very important as far as Georgia's agricultural industry. And then as we saw when the Depression was beginning, there was this call to diversify, to improve farming methods. And so that picks up after World War II. New crops are introduced. Peanuts become a huge cash crop in Georgia. They began to use chemicals. So the boll weevil which actually wasn't eradicated until, I want to say, the 1990s, at least could be controlled, and farms become better organized. You have fewer farms, but you have bigger farms. And those farms are better organized. They're better run than those smaller farms were. Diversity, peanuts, soybeans, and tobacco is 27% of the crops that are grown in Georgia. Cotton is only about 2.5%. And that's a far cry from 99.9% to 2.5%. 99.9% when the Civil War broke out, and 2.5% in today, 2022, 2021. But again, the biggest agricultural entity, I guess is a good word to use, is poultry farming and livestock. Chickens, cows, goats, pigs, that sort of thing. All right, so there are a lot of changes in agriculture. As I just mentioned, agriculture becomes focused on fewer farms, but bigger farms. And here's really a telling statistic that has only gotten even more since 1969. But in 1945, Georgia had a little over 250,000 farms, or a little less than 250,000 farms, 226,000. They were about 105 acres average in size, for a total of 23,730,000 acres of farmland. Look what happens 15 years later, after the war. There's only 67,000 farms. One reason is people left the farm, right? They went to the city. They went to Atlanta. They went to Columbus, to Macon, and changed their livelihood. Those farms averaged about 500 acres in size. So we have fewer farms, but we have more farmland. About 33,500,000 acres of farmland existed in 1969. And I need to go back and see what that total is today, what the total number of farms is in Georgia, and hopefully I'll have an opportunity to do that this weekend. Just, some neat pictures. I've got an actual hands-on that you can touch, and we'll do that Monday, about agriculture in Georgia. It's a pretty neat little thing, neat little artifact. As far as agriculture is concerned, and one of the reasons cotton production goes down is because one of the technological innovations that comes about during World War II are synthetic fibers, things like rayon and nylon. And that reduces the need for cotton. People don't need as much cotton. And as that need for cotton goes down, then Georgians begin to plant other things. They plant trees. Georgia has a tremendous number of tree farms, peanuts, soybeans, corn, just other things besides cotton. And of course, we mentioned this, that farming becomes mechanized because there's new technology, and it's cheaper technology. And as we talked about, there's a new crop, and it's chickens. Chickens are cheap. Chickens are easy to farm. By 1970, after, again, 25 years after the end of the war, about a third of Georgia's farming output is in the form of chicken. Of course, sharecropping goes by the wayside, and those sharecroppers have to find work elsewhere. Here you have Queen Chicken and King Cotton. Queen Chicken replaced King Cotton. And I don't know about y'all, but those are some big old chickens right there. Anyway, the growth of Atlanta is another one of those things that we see after World War II. Atlanta really becomes a major city. It becomes an international city after World War II. In 1940, at the outbreak of World War II, 65% of Georgians lived on the farm. They lived in a rural area. 26 years later, that's almost been completely reversed. 60% of Georgians live in or near a city. And of course, Atlanta is the largest city in Georgia. It's one of the largest cities in the Southeast, if not the largest city in the Southeast. And today, if somebody that's not from Georgia thinks about Georgia, they think about Atlanta because it is the most visible city in the state. And honestly, today it takes up a great deal of the Piedmont region and even part of the mountainous regions. But it grows so much because of two men. William B. Hartsfield, that's a name that should be somewhat familiar as we talk about the Jackson-Hartsfield International Airport. It's named after William B. Hartsfield, and Ivan Allen Jr. And they both have tremendous impact. Atlanta, and we'll get back to those in just a minute, but Atlanta, after the war, becomes a hub for not only railroads, but the new interstate highway system. So if you go to Atlanta today, you have I-75, I-20, and I-85 that all intersect in Atlanta. I-20 goes straight through the middle from east to west. I-75 and I-85 combine and go through Atlanta from north or south to north or north to south. Of course, I mentioned Hartsfield Airport. It's the home of Delta Airlines, one of the largest airlines in the world. Used to be many more airlines that were housed in Atlanta, but they went by the wayside, one of those being Eastern Airlines. And then we have MARTA, the Metropolitan Atlanta Rapid Transit Authority. That's the bus line and the subway in Atlanta. Atlanta is one of the few southern cities that actually has a subway. If you remember, the Chattahoochee River flows through Atlanta. Well, up in Gainesville, they built a dam, and it formed Lake Sidney Lanier. Lake Lanier became the water source for the city of Atlanta. And it's caused some problems. It's been quite controversial over the years as Atlanta has needed more and more and more water. Let's talk about Mayor Hartsfield. He was Atlanta's mayor longer than anybody else in Atlanta's history. He served 6 terms, 1937 to 1961. So he sees the Depression, he sees World War II, and he sees Atlanta grow after the war. He's able to lead them really into a time of prosperity, great prosperity. And he was a builder. What he wanted people in Atlanta to do was build. And so he introduced a lot of different building projects, including those expressways, the interstate highways that we talked about, various parks throughout the city. He's a major reason why Hartsfield International Airport was actually created. And he died in 1971, and upon his death, they renamed the Atlanta airport Hartsfield International Airport, and then later Mayor Maynard Jackson's name is added to that. So today it's the Jackson Hartsfield International Airport. Ivan Allen Jr. Served 2 terms as Atlanta's mayor from 1962 to 1970. He is one of, in fact, he's the only politician who was brave enough to speak out in favor of the Civil Rights Act. Remember, Richard B. Russell speaks out against the Civil Rights Act and, in fact, leads that filibuster in the Senate. And ultimately, that leads to his downfall. Ivan Allen is courageous, and he stands up and he speaks out, not against the Civil Rights Act, but he's in favor of it. He steals the Atlanta Braves. He brings them from Milwaukee to Atlanta. And he also is instrumental in getting the Falcons, don't hold that against him, to Atlanta as a new franchise in 1967, I believe it was. My favorite Falcon ever was their first draft pick, a guy named Tommy Nobis, played linebacker from the University of Texas. He's able to steal the Hawks from St. Louis, and so Georgia, Atlanta in particular, goes from having no Major League Sports franchises to having 3 just within a matter of years, a couple of years. He's not just about athletics, though. He also is about the performing arts, and so he's instrumental in building the Memorial Arts Cultural Center. That would be performing arts and visual arts. And he also is involved in having Atlanta Civic Center built. It's no longer there. It's no longer in use. Used to be a huge concert venue. Today, we have the Braves. They came to Atlanta in 1966. Ted Turner bought them in 1976, and that's when I remember really starting to watch the Braves, because he began to broadcast them nationally on TBS, Turner Broadcasting System. It used to be Channel 17. And of course, they were terrible when I was a kid. They had, spurts where they were pretty good, but they were for the most part terrible. When I lived in Atlanta in the early 80s, we used to joke that you didn't have to buy tickets. You could just go down and park your car at the stadium, and somebody would put tickets on your windshield. But of course, the Braves in the 90s became very different. Won the World Series in 95. Won, I think it was 13 straight divisional titles, which is pretty impressive. And then, of course, they won the World Series again last year. So they've won 2. The Falcons, they were an expansion franchise, NFL franchise, came in 1966. They've played in 2 Super Bowls. 1998 was not even close, and we don't even want to talk about 2017 because it was heartbreaking. The Hawks came in 1968, and they've never played for an NBA title. They've never won an NBA title. The Atlanta United, that's the Women's National Basketball Association. No, I'm sorry, that's the MLS expansion franchise. They're Major League Soccer. And I believe they have won an MLS championship, if I'm not mistaken. And they're owned by the same guy that owns the Falcons, Arthur Blank. The Atlanta Dream is the WNBA franchise. They've been to the finals but have never won a title. Pretty successful. Atlanta Rugby. It's actually the Atlanta Rugby Football Club. That's their name. Real original, right? They were their first year of play was 2020, but of course COVID shut that down, cut it short. Really pretty interesting. I think they've started back up. I'm not really sure, but if you're interested in rugby, that's a good opportunity to see really good rugby being played. It's not violent at all, not at all. So if I were there in front of you, and in fact, on Monday we'll come back to this, but kind of give you an idea, give you a chance to look at it. You've got some logos, and I would ask you to name them. Of course, the Atlanta Dream is pretty easy to figure out, right? The Atlanta Hawks are pretty easy to figure out. Atlanta United's pretty easy to figure out. What's more difficult, unless you pay attention to things, are this one. That's who? Atlanta Braves, that's right. This is the Atlanta Falcons. That one I can't remember, but it was a soccer franchise. The Atlanta Chiefs actually won a world title in what was the precursor to MLS, or the Major League Soccer. The Atlanta Silverbacks, they're a soccer team in Atlanta, semi-pro team. These two you'll never figure out. This is the Atlanta Flames. They were an NHL franchise in Atlanta. And then the one above them is the Atlanta Thrashers, named after that beautiful state bird that we have, the brown thrashers. All right, or the brown thrasher. I think we're going to stop there. Let me see what comes next. Let me just end right here, and I'm sure there's a couple of videos we'll go back and watch just to kind of nail some things down. When we think about William B. Hartsfield, we want to think about transportation, the airport, the interstate systems, those sorts of things. And when we think about Ivan Allen Jr., we want to think about entertainment. The buildings that he built were not, business-oriented. They were cultural in nature. And then the sports franchises that he brings to Atlanta. So we're going to stop there. Again, we'll be either in Dalton by this time or close to it. Y'all think about us. Cheer us on from wherever you are. And hopefully we'll come back with a seat in the state championship game on Tuesday. All right. Let me see here what I need to do.